Hey everybody, welcome back to Resolute Square. It is 7 o'clock in the East. It is 4 o'clock in the West, Tuesday, February the 21st. I am Reed Galen. Thank you for having us in your lives, in your homes, on your phones tonight. Joining me is Rick Wilson, longtime Republican consultant, anti-Trump tip of the spear, author of Running with the Devil and Everything Trump Touches Dies. Stuart Stevens, longtime Republican strategist, author of It Was All a Lie, and Joe Trippi, legendary Democratic strategist, and the person whom I want to kick off with this evening, as we are discussing tonight, guys, the impending 1 year anniversary since Russia invaded Ukraine. So just to recap, about this time last year, Vladimir Putin was giving a speech about how Ukraine was a part of their blood, of Russian soil, of Russian history, of Russian culture, that the Ukrainian people were friends and cousins and brothers and sisters. But it was also run by a bunch of Nazis and Banderites and drug dealers and drug addicts and everything else. At that point, 2 days ago, 2 days before the invasion, no one could quite figure out what was going to happen. On the 24th of February, 2022, Russian forces did further invade Ukraine. They've already taken over eastern provinces of the country in a mission that they thought was going to take 3 days, that the Russian army would roll over the Ukrainians as they had in 2014. And this would be something where they would oust the democratically elected government of President Zelensky, and return Ukraine to its proper place as part of the Russian Empire. Historians have said Russia is an empire with Ukraine, and it is not without one. And so as we start our conversation this evening, Joe, I wanted to go to you first. You've spent a lot of time in Kyiv, in Ukraine generally. So I want to get from you your sense of the Ukrainian people as you knew them before the war and as you see them now.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be working in Ukraine from about 2018 to through 2019 through the elections, and got to help sort of. There was this huge sense of energy for democracy that was like rolling throughout the country, and new parties were being formed. Zelensky, Servant of the People Party, was about to be formed later in 2000, later in the year. But Prime Minister Vladimir Groisman had started the Ukrainian Strategy Party. There was all these new parties were breaking out, and you could tell that there was this really energetic move towards Western democracy and away from Russia, including. I mean, I'd walk on the streets. I remember it was exact date, April 23rd, 2018. I walked into Independence Square, and up on the massive billboard that said "Freedom is our religion," and that's what I'd been feeling everywhere I went as I was working there. I mean, they had, from Crimea and in the original attack, they had the same thing. They were displaying Russian tanks that they had captured and other military stuff that they had captured from the Russians. But what was striking to me was the people. Everywhere I went, when I talked to them, oh, you're American, can we count on you? We know something's happening here. We know something's coming, but we want our democracy. And I don't know how. It still strikes me as just crazy that Putin miscalculated. So it was clear to me from the very beginning that there was no way in hell these people were going to just give up and let him roll through. That he had no idea, and that's what I posted in Twitter, like 3 or 4 days before the invasion, that Putin had no idea how hard the Ukrainian people would fight to stay free of his rule, and that continued through the election. People don't realize Zelensky got 73% of the vote. I mean, he wiped out everybody, and the Russian,
Right.
the Ukrainian people clearly were turning the page. They were getting rid of politicians that that were still trying to toe the line or walk the tightrope between Putin and Ukraine, and and try to build those kinds of coalitions. Those people got wiped out, and Zelensky. That was a victory for democracy. That was a moment that democracy really took hold in Ukraine, where they had faith in their leader, weren't looking at them as corrupt. He'd run against corruption, but the other side of it was that whole time I was there was real fear of Trump. There was a recognition that there was that this was going to be a long fight with Putin one way or another, whether he invaded or not. And they were terrified. I mean, I'm talking about people on the street, people in bars. I mean, wherever you went, there was this real fear of whether America would be there if Trump was president. So when you had Zelensky win in late 2019 and Biden win the 2020 election, I mean, that sort of sets up where we're at today with that trip that Biden just took, the historic trip to Kiev and to Poland. It's just amazing to watch. And I still have so many friends in that country that when all this started out, I'm calling them, are you okay? Some of them I still can't find. But I think it's, democracy is winning. And I think it's really important for people to understand why this is autocracy writ large, right? I mean, here's what you get if you got an autocracy. You got Putin, who can meat grind 500,000 new troops into it, basically arrest anybody who's protesting him, and this is what you get. And the other side of that are these two leaders of democracies who, yes, it's going to be painful for the people of Europe, painful for U.S. citizens in terms of inflation and other things. But this isn't about inflation. This is a fight for democracy against autocracy. And if you want to see what you get, you're watching it writ large with what Putin's doing in Ukraine.
So Stuart, let's talk a little bit about Russia as a country, as a culture, as a history. If anyone, and specific to Ukraine, if anyone has read Famine by Anne Applebaum about Stalin intentionally starving millions of Ukrainians, if anyone has read Tim Snyder's Bloodlands about all of the horrific things, if not taken place just in Ukraine, but in that whole sort of Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Lithuania, those areas. If you remember that it was in World War II that Hitler planned to take over Ukraine. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, so that they could move German citizens in there, right? That they could create a Lebensraum, living space for their own people. And the Russians, as I said at the top, are chauvinistic anyway, but particularly chauvinistic when it comes to Ukraine, which is they see as part of their turf. And that Putin said that he would not have a free, independent, democratic campaign on his borders, and certainly didn't want one who was part of NATO.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two different narratives here that are really important to distinguish. One is, this is Putin's war, the act of a sole madman. I don't buy that from everything I've read. I think it's Russia's war. I think Russia created Putin. I don't think Putin created Russia. And there is tremendous support for the war. And, we should remember Russia's not North Korea. I mean, they do have the internet there. There's boutiques in Moscow,
Right.
This is a country that has integrated with Europe on a lot of economic levels. Free, you can leave the country, you could. So I think that we have given Russia too much benefit of the doubt. And, if you go back to 2012, when Mitt Romney was asked the greatest geopolitical foe, he said Russia. And I was around then, and there was never any political gain. Nobody said to me, hey, this will really help us in polls if you say Russia. And he was hammered by everybody on the sort of center right, center left, the Democratic, which, I mean, that happens in a campaign. But the dirty little secret is we didn't get much support behind the scenes from Republicans. They were pretty much calling us and whispering, well, really, it's China, don't you think? And what's just fascinating to me is how Romney saw this. And he proved to be more right than probably he would have thought at the time. I mean, they came in,
But just on that front, Stu,
yeah,
just the difference between Russia and China is the second largest economy in the world,
right.
right? 1.6 billion people, massive military, massive everything else. Russia is like a truck stop gas station with nuclear weapons. Like it doesn't have anything else.
Yeah, and that was sort of a lot of the criticism that you're bringing back the Cold War. Um, Romney understood, I think, something fundamental about Putin and about the culture. Um, and what's extraordinary is to look back now, how they attacked the elections, and this is something we don't talk about enough. There is no doubt that Russia supported Trump. Every intelligence agency, the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee has determined this. And what is the direct result of that? Well, Trump was president, and we can have a debate whether or not what Russia did was definitive. We'll never really know what Russia did. It was a covert operation. Um, but because he supported Putin in so many ways, you now have a pro-Putin element in the Republican Party. So you have Marjorie Taylor Greene, second most important, most powerful person in the House, is pro-Putin. And, this war goes on. It could lose the war for Ukraine if there could be a tipping point
So
of lack of support.
So let's zoom out of Ukraine for a second, Rick, and zoom back in here to the U.S. just to dovetail onto what Stuart said about this, which is remember, I think it was in 2015, Kevin McCarthy, now Speaker of the House, I think he was then whip, said in a closed door meeting he was pretty much convinced that there were two people, Donald Trump and former member of Congress Dana Rohrbacher from a place I used to live in Southern California, must absolutely be on Putin's payroll because there was just no other excusing or understanding why they acted the way they did. But also to Stuart's point that it was a tenet of House Republican campaign literature in 2020 that cutting off aid for Ukraine would be part of the plan this year, even
Yep.
though a year ago at Biden's State of the Union address they couldn't fasten blue and yellow things to their lapels fast enough. So give us a little sense about the United States domestic politics
Sure.
of the Russia-Ukraine fight.
Well, I think Stuart's point and your point that there is a major cohort of the Republican Party today that is aggressively, assertively pro-Putin. They would like the U.S. to switch sides and back Vladimir Putin and destroy Ukraine. Now, why do they believe this? There are a whole host of reasons. One is they have become increasingly comfortable and increasingly attracted to being, to put it mildly, dictator curious. They like the authoritarian strongman act. They like the extraordinary use of state power. They like the not so subtle messages from Putin of that he's the last protector of racial purity, that he's the last bastion of anti-LGBT, that he's going to
Right.
hold the line on an imaginary civilizational set of values that doesn't exist anymore and never, frankly, really existed in Russia or the Soviet Union. But he has found a way to do that hook. Now, I spent this afternoon, Reed, about 40 minutes, and I read Vladimir Putin's version of the State of the Union. And guys, to say it was dark and bizarre would not surprise you, but exactly how much it sounds like the evening news cycle on Fox. This could have been Rip and Read from Tucker Carlson's show or vice versa. These people are part of a global authoritarian movement. It is a sweeping and striking movement that believes in the unlimited use of power and violence to achieve its ideological ends. And the fact that Vladimir Putin today is rattling the nuclear saber again, and that he's playing all these games of trying to say, well, America is so much worse. It is it unbelievably resembles the sort of so-called America First talking points and propaganda, where America can do no good in the world, where we have to retreat to our homeland, pull up a wall, and pretend that we can be an isolated little island somewhere. And look, we're a year into this fight with Putin and Ukraine, but this is part of a much longer battle that's been going on since the end of the Cold War, where Vladimir Putin, the ex-KGB agent, saw his country lose the communist way of life. The Soviet Union collapsed. He has been bitter and furious ever since then. He leads an international criminal kleptocratic order. They are gleefully engaging in war crimes. And the fact that there are so many Republicans in this country who believe that Ukraine is run by Nazi, cannibal, pedophile, Jew, whatever, amalgamation of things from their nightmare
They've got
closet.
the secret labs, Rick, the secret
The
labs.
biolabs. But the fact that that is out there is because of people like Rupert Murdoch, Tucker Carlson, Lachlan Murdoch, Alex Jones, and Jack Posobiec, this entire enormous pro-Russia cohort in what was the Republican Party, where they have decided that the country we defeated in the Cold War and the evils we defeated in the Cold War are now the values they want to emulate in the modern era.
Rick, Rick, I read that speech too, and what struck me was there were sections about culture that could have come from DeSantis.
Absolutely.
I'm writing a piece about that for Resolute Square because it's like unbelievable the way he was talking about, family, basically this is a country that they see as being run by white men. There are no gay people. They're all good Christians. Anyway, I just thought literally you could have taken that piece and sections of that, and DeSantis would have given it.
But think about this. Another part of Joe, let me ask you this, because another part of the messaging that Rick touched on is this sort of nuclear saber rattling. But here in the U.S., it's coming from Republicans who are like, Biden's going to start World War III. You shouldn't mess with people that have nuclear weapons. Mike Lee from Utah, is now suddenly like a chicken on the world stage. And so many of these people, we took on the Soviet Union in the Cold War for 50 years, knowing that we had thousands of warheads pointed at one another. It was Ronald Reagan, largely, in the 80s, that, and we can go into that's a whole documentary series, but by the end of basically his presidency, the Soviet Union was in full collapse. Even Gorbachev saw it, and he tried to smooth the way and remember that it was the hardliners that tried to capture him as the Soviet Union fell. But again, they left a vacuum, when that happened, that let somebody like Boris Yeltsin, then subsequently Vladimir Putin, who's now basically the czar there. But talk to us about how you see that, because it's another part of the authoritarian thing, which there's one, the United States can never be okay, can never be good. And two, that there's no such thing as history, as if we haven't been the hegemon of the world since 1945.
The politics of eternity.
No, but the thing that strikes me listening to Rick is all those things that he's talked about, they did in Ukraine. Putin did. I mean, using the internet to attack and disinformation, and I mean, there were Russian agents all over the place. You couldn't help running into them. They were trying to impact that election and trying to put somebody like Trump in that election. And what happened was a lot of the office holders or people who were in those old parties left to start new parties. They were not going to be part of it. They were, and the Ukrainian people, 73% of them said, no, we're not going to have that. Get the hell out of here. We don't want somebody who's corrupt and bought by Putin or be Putin's puppet. And I guarantee you there was one guy that Putin and the Russians and all the disinformation were trying to stop, and that guy's name was Zelensky, because he was coming from the outside, and he had gathered. I mean, like I said, a lot of the institutional players in quote the old parties said no more. I'm starting a new party. I'm joining Zelensky's party, whatever. But they bailed, and democracy. That's what I think sort of interesting, because it's like a fledgling brand new democracy where they understand the power of it. And
But
what's
Joe,
happening
I
here
think it's
and what's at
important to
stake.
understand, though.
What,
I
yeah,
think it's important to understand, though, like what the basis of Zelensky's success has been. What got a new party off the ground there was not about this issue or that
right.
issue or trying to scoop up different interest groups and saying we'll take some of Ukrainian history here and some of its political history there. It was founded in a belief system, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Of democracy matters,
And
because remember that the Russia, I mean, Putin had tried to kill, was it back in 2008, that poisoned the guy in the Orange Revolution,
yeah,
right? And
Yushchenko.
yeah,
that's
yeah,
what,
thank you.
all that stuff failed. That's what I'm saying. All that he was doing, and it worked better here. It worked better in our country, and you can
Hey,
see it in the
listen, I
Republican
wrote,
Party.
Joe, I wrote a piece. I think you can make a good case that the Russian attack against America went much better than the Russian attack against Ukraine.
Exactly.
No
And
question. No
That was
and
what was
question.
Right.
fascinating, being on the ground there
No
and
question.
watching it in motion, and watching how those parties responded and changed and moved and started new and how the Ukrainian people responded in unity to move towards the West and democracy and away from authoritarian. But by the way, they knew what authoritarianism was.
Yeah,
they,
they've
you know,
lived with it most of their
right, they live
history.
it. Here, the Republicans do not. I mean, the MAGA. Well, so many of these sort of middle of the road will be supporting Trump if he's the nominee. People do not get what the stakes are. This is autocracy versus democracy. You are aiding and abetting an autocratic movement.
Joe, I
And
think it's
instead of
perfect.
leaving that party, or there have been a few, but instead of trying to destroy that movement in their party, they've embraced it and are
I think
now hostage to it.
listen, Joe, I think Rick's point that they're autocratic curious. I think that it's not that they don't. I think that understand it. I think they find it very appealing. I think they see themselves as part of a party that Trump's coalition was 85% white in a country that 60%, 58% white, less so since we've been on the show, and they see this being they're losing any
With the
sort
notable
of
exception of
mandate,
this four people. Yeah, right.
and they yeah. So I want to speak for those people, the four whitest people in America, but I think that they find it very appealing. I mean, and DeSantis is more so this way than Trump even.
That I wanted to point out,
But
Reed. Did you guys see that
yeah,
DeSantis
because Rick, we
interview?
were talking about that a little bit yesterday. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. That DeSantis interview where he essentially, again, he was on did an interview about Ukraine, and he said, "Oh, well, Russia's not a threat to us. NATO is a threat to them." He went through the entire checklist of Soviet era and current era Russian propaganda talking points, and this was a guy who was minimizing Russia's threat, who would not say the words Ukraine in the interview if he could help it, because he really did not want, he wanted to frame America once again, as they all do, as the bad actor and Russia as the role model. And I got to tell you, folks, Ron DeSantis just showed us his throat for 2024. He just showed us a giant gap in his armor. He's going to try to play, I was an advisor to the SEALs, I'm in Navy, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, you're also a suck up to Russia. You're also repeating Russian foreign ministry talking points. I mean, I was
But
shocked
yeah, Rick,
Well,
listening to it.
and they're
if you
already
go back to
moving to East Palestine as the whole
no, I know,
Biden
But
wasn't
that,
here.
but that, but
look,
that's,
but
He
but
was
let
in
me say
but
one thing.
Ukraine.
Rick, I mean,
But,
because Joe, but that's the whole thing about the talking points about the
Yeah.
narrative is
Mhm.
President, and I want to get to President Biden's visit to Kyiv in a few minutes, but he went to Kyiv. He should have gone to East Palestine,
Yeah.
right? He went to Kyiv. He should have spent more time at the border, right? As if somehow the President of the United States, all of us are intimately familiar with the role, is not a 24/7 job that literally follows you everywhere you go, right?
Mhm.
Wherever it is you are, 24/7, 365. You are president of the United States,
Every
wherever it is
minute
you
of the
are.
day.
When the president travels, literally they call it the Kyiv White House, right? The Charleston White House, right? Because wherever the president is literally the center of the free world.
Right.
But Rick, actually, Stu, I want to talk to you, and then Joe, I want to go to you. Stuart, like as someone who three of us worked in Republican politics for a long time, part of Republican orthodoxy was that the United States is a fundamental good in the world, that we were, as Reagan said, the shining city on the hill.
This is the biggest shift. If you look at that was an absolute. Which side of the Berlin Wall you were standing on defined where you were as a Republican. That moment you say, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down this wall, tear down this wall. That was the epitome of that. And this has changed now. And, if you go back, you look at Fox News, it used to be pretty much hitting on left, right, sort of within the sort of orthodoxy of American culture.
Right.
And now it has become an autocratic propagandist movement that they really are echoing not just Russian talking points, but Soviet talking points. From like 1920, the major thrust was that there really isn't a democracy in the United States. They had to say, the Soviets had to say this. The Bolsheviks said this. I mean, it was all the way through. And who has carried that now? Republicans. Republicans say that Joe Biden isn't legally elected. Of course, they love that in Russia because, I mean, look, things may not be great in Russia, but they don't believe this bullshit. They have a democracy in the United States, and it's extraordinary how this shift has occurred. And one good that may come out of it is if again the Democratic Party, which at one time was very strong on foreign policy. I mean, you go back to the 1960 election, Kennedy versus Nixon. Kennedy was elected over a missile gap. If you go back and you look at those debates, he had the right-wing position. And Nixon accused him that, he had the secret plan to invade Cuba. Well, turns out he was right. But if you could go back
and every Republican since Reagan versus Carter, national security, whether it was Russia or after 2001, Islamic terrorism, national security was the centerpiece. It was we will be the most robust, aggressive, we will protect this country no matter what it takes. And now they're like, oh, can we have some belly scratches flat?
But don't you think, I think the purpose of this is autocracy can't exist if it's not a culture of fear. If democracy is working, you don't need autocracy. So they can't change the country. All the Stephen Millers in the world can't stop what's happening demographically in the country. So if they can change how people feel about the country, that a certain segment that will demand a new government, a new form of government, which is basically, Hungary is. And I think that that's what they're about.
So Joe, I want to talk a little. I want to think about something Stuart said there vis-a-vis the Ukrainians. There was a story, I think it was early on in the invasion, where there were a lot of Russian soldiers calling home, and I think we should take a moment to really appreciate the incredible effectiveness of the Ukrainian security services.
Right.
I mean, these are guys who are guys and gals, they really know their stuff, who are walking down these incredible promenades and esplanades, in Curzon or wherever it is, and being like, wow, look at how they live.
And these villages.
Everything's so nice, everything's so new, everything's so green. And these guys are coming from huts in, Soviet Central Asia.
Absolutely.
Right, they're like, oh my God, I found a washing machine. I'm going to send it home to my wife.
And Bucha, they killed a man because they had 2 bathrooms in their house, and they couldn't believe that there was only one family living in that house. And they were convinced that they were hiding another family, so they killed them. I mean, that is
right.
Just.
But that's what I'm saying. In the face of in the face of all this, what it is again, I just think that the Ukrainian people know what the stakes are. It is autocracy versus their fledgling and energetic democracy, and they're not going to give that up. They will fight till, and that's part of the whole thing. Let's go to the negotiate. The West wants people calling to negotiate a peace. Not going to happen. I'm just telling you, it's not going to happen. I don't think. I don't see.
And why should we ask that of them? Why should we demand
not only that, the fact is they give up what the Russians have already taken. Putin will be back for more, and that's why Poland is so. They know, Poland knows what's going to happen. They are not going to give up defending Ukraine. Moldova is next. Everybody knows it.
Or the Baltic.
They will.
And listen, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they all know.
Yeah, they all know. And that's why I think the most important thing is,
let me ask you that,
what
guys.
would have happened if Trump had one? I mean, we all know what would have happened.
I tell you what would have happened. You would have had Vladimir Putin in Kyiv today.
Yeah.
Because not Joe Biden.
And Trump would have had a hotel deal.
Yeah, there's enormous will of the Ukrainian people, enormous. But they need the tools to fight. And Biden held the alliance together and has been moved, in Poland.
We talked about Putin's speech today, but I have to say, folks, I thought Biden's speech in Poland and I thought his speech in Kyiv were two beautifully constructed pieces of rhetorical masterworks that were inside the perfect frame of America's national security tradition.
Yep.
And they showed hope and optimism and leadership and strength. And if you're a Russian intelligence officer right now analyzing those words and matching them up against what we've done to date, when Putin says today in his speech, "Oh, NATO is at war with us," when NATO goes to war with you, you'll know it.
You'll know.
But
I mean, think about this. I think just we praise the Ukrainian security services, and I would also like to praise both the national security, political, and speechwriting teams at the White House for the last couple of weeks worth of work, because they are just knocking it out of the park. I mean, truly knocking it out of the park with this stuff.
And keeping secrets. It's amazing to me that trip didn't leak.
Good. You know what? This is something I learned from.
Unbelievable.
I learned from Dick Cheney. He said, "Good White Houses leak on purpose. Bad White Houses just leak."
And the Ukrainians are incredibly good at keeping secrets.
Reed, what did it take to pull that trip? I mean, you've advanced all this kind of stuff. When we were talking earlier,
it's an amazing thing. Like that's the kind of thing. I mean, I remember years ago, right after the invasion of Iraq, when we were still winning, and Thanksgiving, waking up and seeing the video of then President Bush in Baghdad with the troops over Thanksgiving, right? And going, "Oh my God, how'd they pull that off? Oh my God, how'd they pull that off?" And it is one of those things where they scale everything down, right? There's two reporters and they say, you're going to give us your phones. We're going to swear to you within, secrecy, everything else. And of course, these reporters, they want to be there because it's like, it's for Sabrina Siddiqui. She's going to write a book about this, for the Wall Street Journal, right? So like it's the scoop of a lifetime. And then to understand the coordination and cooperation really of, the militaries and the security services, but all of the logistics, knowing that they had to have this train, having an answer. Where did this train come from? And why is it in this station right now? Right. Understanding.
10 hours.
I think, Stuart, it was you that posted. Right. But Stuart, it was you that posted the video of the little boy looking out the window of his apartment building going, "Who's in that gigantic motorcade that's driving through town?" Like, gigantic motorcades don't drive down through downtown Kyiv, right? And it's still, nobody could figure it out. And so what it takes is, a dedicated team at the White House to understand, I think, again, what all of the stakes are. Because look, if the President of the United States is in Kyiv and cruise missiles start raining down, and now you have a dead United States president, right? Like we really are in trouble. And I think that's why ultimately President Biden had to make the decision personally, with the Secret Service and the Pentagon and everybody else having to be okay with it. But again, I think, Joe, it was something that you said, and I think I've said previously, which was when Russia invaded a year ago, right? The Ukrainians and NATO looked back across the Atlantic and they saw Joe Biden standing here. And Joe Biden said,
The last
I'm here
Atlantis.
and I'm not going anywhere. And I think him doing this on such an auspicious occasion in such a way that he said, you know what, like, I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. You know, guys, I think we sometimes get a little inured to how awful our politics can be when somebody like Biden, who has met his moment again and again and again, right, in his 7th and 8th decades,
You know, a lot,
right? Some of these people don't do this once in their lives, and he's done it 3 or 4 times in 3 years.
it was funny because a lot of the MAGAs were like, well, he told Russia that he was going there. So, and they thought that was a weakness. That was a power move, folks. That was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be in Kyiv. Try not to fuck yourselves up because I'm going to be there. Don't do anything stupid. And they didn't.
We just puff once. I mean, just to go back to logistics here, Reed. So I think it's underappreciated that the first time a president's been in a war situation that we didn't have troops. A country at war where there are no U.S. troops.
Right.
I mean, I just can't imagine what they went through, worrying about that. Like if everything had gone south, you don't have,
right.
I mean,
well, look, I mean, but that's the other part too, is that somebody, had been working. It was probably somebody on the National Security Council, right, who was working through all of those eventualities, too, right? Like, okay, there was a Marine helicopter somewhere nearby. Now, maybe it wasn't painted green and white, but something was ready to get him out of there if it needed to, right? And
like
but
the most
think,
immediate,
you guys pointed out the secrecy.
Package would there was some evac plan.
Yeah, but
right, because it's not just the president; it's the chief of staff, the military aide, right, the national security advisor, the doctor, right? I mean, all of the stuff that goes with him. I mean, look, guys, think about this, Rick. To your point about the condensed package, do you see how long the motorcade was? It was still 40 freaking cars long. Yeah, right. Like we just can't help ourselves.
Well, they didn't use lights and sirens in Poland. I'm like, no, trust me. They, even without lights and sirens, it's not a subtle thing.
Yeah.
But can we talk about? I want to switch gears on you because I want to talk about leadership here, and I want to get to Zelensky last because I want to spend the most time on him. But we touched on this a few minutes ago, which is I think that Americans do not understand enough about how it is actually Eastern Europe and those countries who spent so much time under Soviet domination, who are really the leaders of global democracy in this time. The leaders of Finland, of Lithuania, of Estonia, of Latvia, of Poland, of Romania, they are the ones who are making sure all this stuff gets to where it needs to be. They know that Belarus is there.
Yeah.
Right. Because they've lived this life and they're never going back to it.
When I started going to Finland a few years ago, the thing that really struck me was how they were so conscious of the Russians. I mean, it was like something, to me, was like, what? I mean, they had a standing army of 400,000 in a country of 5.5 million. In Helsinki, underground, they made a decision to build a fortress. There's a 300-kilometer underground fortress under Helsinki. I mean, it is extraordinary. And when they fought the Russians in the Winter War, they've left the burnout Russian tanks there. I mean, it is so, they feel it.
Well,
I mean,
Joe.
The other thing I'd say, so Stuart, is it goes beyond that. I was in Europe just 2 weeks ago, meeting with folks there about this. And what's fascinating, the European leaders are under tremendous pressure, right? I mean, gas prices are higher there. I mean, all the stuff our people are feeling here, it's even, bigger there in terms of heating and things like that. But even in like Greece and Italy and, France, they get that if Poland comes in, if Poland's next, Moldova's next, they get that this is a fight that's not just about their gas prices, right? I mean, those leaders are under tremendous pressure. Don't get me wrong, but they think they have time. I mean, when you talk to them, we have time because our people get it, get it enough. So I think there's a will with the Ukrainian people. I think there's a will in Eastern and Western Europe to try to get as much equipment as possible to the Ukrainians. The question is, they're literally scraping to get them 5 more tanks or 10 more of these. And here in the States, I still think, and I put this on the press for the most part. You scream inflation, gas prices, and act like without putting
there's
it
no underlying
in context. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and the Republicans, they're still going to scream it, right? And without putting it in context of this is a long. And I do think the president went a long way to talking about this is going to be a long fight, and it's not going to be over with Ukraine. It will. This is something. Fighting to protect democracy from here in is going to be day to day, with everything from organizing, get out the vote here to protect. To having the patience and the will to support the Ukrainian people and Zelensky as long as it takes, which is what the president was urging. I think that it was real important to get that message out because the press is not doing it.
So, Rick,
and the
I
one
want to
thing
talk
that
a little
could
bit
doom
about
Ukraine is an American fifth column for Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Right. So, Rick, I want to talk a little bit about President Zelensky. I often talk about people that meet their moments, right? And he certainly is one. This was a guy who was not necessarily destined for politics. He was on the Ukrainian version of Dancing with the Stars. He was a comedic actor, a dancer. But when the time came, right, he was there and he was the person. And I want to also talk about how the Ukrainians have done an incredible job of communicating to the rest of the world in the idiom of 2023, right, which is just brutal and slashing mockery of the Russians. Incredible use of video and social media.
Totally.
Incredible use of technology to, I mean, how many Russian generals have they killed because the Russians are talking on cell phones? One video, and maybe we'll find it for another show of Zelensky doing the walk and talk in the streets of Kyiv for 4 or 5 minutes, right? Brilliant. Talk a little bit about how Zelensky has utilized all the tools of modern leadership, but also modern politics to really show what Ukraine is A, up against, but B, also made of.
He understood from the beginning, Reed, that the Ukrainian people were going to be facing what was a vaunted huge war machine of the Russian inheritance of the Russian war machine that was built by the Soviets, and prior to that, World War II. And Ukraine always had a sense of nervousness about the big bad bear. But he realized right away that once they knocked him in the nose one time, militarily, as the Russians were coming down, they were trying to encircle Kyiv, and they lost. Once he did that, the tone there changed. It was, the bear may be strong, but we're tough as hell. We're going to beat their asses every day. And what we're going to do is break all the predicates of their self-image. So the trolling and the tweeting and the meme videos and the using video to show Russian tanks and equipment and troops getting destroyed, getting wrecked over and over again, was something they had the speed and flexibility and resilience to do, whereas Russia was not in the same place. Russia couldn't pull that off because they're so hierarchical, they're so security conscious, they're so internally afraid of someone making a mistake.
Russians not historically known for their sense of humor, regardless.
Indeed.
Yeah, but this didn't, it didn't start this way. I mean, look, when I was there, there were all this propaganda that played into him being a comedian. He'd be a clown. You don't want the clown as a leader, and every step of the way through that election, he was growing. I mean, you've seen this. You guys have been with candidates who just, they start off one way.
Were you at that debate, Joe? Were you at the soccer stadium debate?
No, but I saw it, yeah.
That must have been, I mean, we've all done debate prep. His his close for that debate prep was,
Yeah.
"I am not your opponent. I am your verdict."
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
That is like, wow.
But
that's what I'm saying.
but
He
to your
grew and
point,
grew and
we
grew,
have
and
seen
that's why
that.
I think he was literally, another one of these. Just as Biden was the right person to be the president and could hold this together right now, the only one I can think of in either party, by the way,
Let me
pull
let
this
me
off.
let me say one other thing is
Zelensky
they
rose to that
humanized
occasion.
they humanized Ukrainian soldiers
Hmm.
from the very start,
Mm-hmm.
and they showed them as ordinary people. They showed them as every walk of life in Ukraine, rich, poor,
Fathers,
athletes,
sons,
actors.
husbands.
They showed them, and I know this is going to sound like I'm joking, but I'm really not joking. They showed them being nice to pets and animals and cats. The Ukrainian cat meme thing and the cat video thing, people were like, "Oh, that's so silly," but no, it really showed that these were decent people. You got the Russians burning everything down in a town and leaving stacks of dead bodies in the street. You got Ukrainians with cats having kittens in the trenches. It humanized their own forces. It
Yeah.
it gave people a sense
Showing
that the
musicians,
men and women fighting
That's who they
doctors.
are. I mean,
were
that's
real.
literally who they are. I mean, I fell in love with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people
We
during
should
that.
all go over. We should go over.
Yeah, I'm
But
sure that's what they need. It's us.
Yeah, they need a 10-hour train. But no, and that's the other thing,
Yeah, look,
Phil. All this
if
crap
we could each
about
send them an Abrams tank, we'd be better off, probably.
this crap about Biden's age. I mean, look, he went to bed at midnight, got up at 4:15, flew. I mean,
I was
landed.
thinking
Got
about
on a
that. They
10-hour.
got on that plane at 4:30 in the morning,
Yeah,
and it was
Yeah,
not. It was not
after
Air
an
Force One.
all-nighter.
It was the 757, which is not
that
the
is
Yeah,
not.
it's
Yeah,
not the
that is not
that
the
is
same as the
747.
not.
big
You
one.
don't
It
have
needed to
like the
be.
comfy bed. You don't have the whole. And then he
No, I
gets
mean
there
it's
and he
got it.
likes.
Look, the little thing on the front. It's because it's normally the VP aircraft or the Secretary of State's aircraft. It's got like a little office, right?
Right.
It's got a couch in it, and maybe they hold a bed in. I don't know, but it's not. No, look, it's not.
And
It's
then
not at all the
10 hours on a slow train.
Yeah.
right.
I mean,
Now, although
I
that
mean,
is
it was
Biden's
positively
superpower.
Rooseveltian, right? Like, I mean,
yeah.
10 hours on an armored train.
No, and then he went straight into Zelensky right after that. I mean, that's what I'm
And he
trying to
looked
say.
good.
Like, you know,
I would have been like falling asleep. I guarantee you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
No. Um,
But I
if
mean,
people
we've
don't,
seen this though, Joe. You mentioned this all too, because
yeah,
we've all seen this, which is whether or not it's a debate. Or I always thought that you saw this when I worked for Bush, which is he was okay in town hall meetings, right? He could hold his own. But when you put him in front of a stadium of 20 or 30 or 40 or 50,000 people, he grew to meet the crowd, right?
right.
He grew to the
That's,
Yep.
moment.
Yep.
And not everyone can do that, right?
a lot
That's
of people
something that's
shrink.
sort of innate.
A lot of people shrink. Look, I got to give a plug here. We're talking about Ukraine. Everybody should be reading. At Resolute Square, we're fortunate enough to have this woman who is over there she's literally on Zero Line. She has a piece
Yep.
today in Resolute Square, Life from Zero Line. She was over in Ukraine as a journalist. She saw this happening. She volunteered. She became formally a member of the Ukrainian military. They trained her as a medic.
Yep.
Now she's out there fighting. Sarah Ashton Krillo. And we're going to have a thing tomorrow night with her and Malcolm Nance. But I'm just sort of in awe of what she's done.
But I mean, think about this. I mean, let me say this about the fight for democracy, right? Because Sarah and her compatriots are fighting for
Yeah.
democracy. They pick up an AK-47 every day. They fly a drone every day. They light off a Javelin missile every day, right, to fight for democracy. They dig trenches. It's freezing, right? Their friends get killed, right? They see the brutality as they're going back through towns and cities that they've liberated. They have to watch and see the cruise missiles flying over every morning and every night. They have to know that that cruise missile has a child's name on it, has a school's name on it, has an apartment building's name on it. And yet they get up every day and they do it. And they say to Vladimir Putin, they look him and 500,000, maybe it's not that many, hundreds of thousands of dead Russians in the face and said, not one step further, right? And so all I could ask folks, right? You don't want to fight for democracy like they do, then fight for democracy like we do, right? Because if you don't fight for it like we do, we will fight for it like they do. And believe me, these are people who have done everything. They have given up everything.
Everything.
You know, I think there was as Joe, you might know better, there was a flood of refugees leaving Ukraine out of the West into Poland. And I would say this, so many countries in Europe have absorbed as many Ukrainian
Half
families
million,
as they possibly
4.5
could
million.
have. But many Ukrainians have stayed. And you see those videos, you
And
know,
come back.
that came out of the old women, you know, old and young women, I should just say, you know, in the train station in the middle of the night singing as they make, you know, Molotov cocktails, you know, but for the grace of God that I could find 30 seconds of that courage, of that bravery to sing in the face of pure evil.
Yeah,
It
it's
is
incredible.
the
You
fight
think
of our
about
times.
they gave out. There's a new book, Overreach, about the whole invasion. It is just fantastic. That 200,000 Molotov cocktails. I mean, had the Russians gotten in here, 200,000? I mean, all these like hipsters and everything. I've always kind of wondered, like, what happened to those Molotov? Are they like sitting like in apartments now?
Oh
and
yeah,
stuff?
I mean, look, if
But
they
When they were preparing to defend Kyiv, they were. I had a friend of mine who was over there, an academic who left, but he said my brother is a high school chemistry teacher, and you can bet that the things he did the minute the invasion started was say class is dismissed except for what we're going to do now,
yeah,
Right.
and started building ampho bombs and shit. And these people, the two people in the world I wouldn't fuck with militarily are the Finns and the Ukrainians.
Right.
I mean, they just absolutely do not
yeah,
quit. They don't have quit in them.
they're not going to quit. There's no way, and they will lie in wait in some of these towns if the Russians push in. But I just the determination and the will is there. We just all got to get them the equipment and the tools they need. And by the way, they've been creative as hell with the stuff we've gotten them. I mean, using drones in new ways that the Russians weren't expecting. I mean, they've clearly outmaneuvered and overwhelmed them. It's just a question of getting them more and a lot
All
more.
those pieces of
But I
footage.
think also it goes back to one of those sort of fundamental tenets of the military or a military conflict, which is you have one side, the Ukrainians, who are literally and figuratively fighting for their lives, for their families, and for their way of
Right.
life. And you have another side where the Russian military has been notorious for decades, maybe hundreds of years, as a brutal institution, right? Remember in World War II, they used to have something called penal battalions where they were all prisoners that they'd emptied out, right?
They have
And
those.
they sent them in the left front wave, right? And if they turn around, the KGB at the time, the NKVD, shot them, right? So like this is not like, so you see that they're dying by the tens of thousands. Half of them don't know what they're doing. I think whoever talked about the fact that they had the hand-me-down military from the Cold War, how many billions of dollars were skimmed off the top as opposed to going to training or new equipment or whatever. You know, now they're rolling out stuff that was probably rusty in 1980.
Yeah.
And so you have a bunch of guys who were probably drunk, completely untrained. Their leaders kept getting picked off because the Ukrainians know how to find them. And you've got Putin, Rick, that Alex Vindman said to us right about this time last year, which is, if Putin isn't successful, he'll play the "if I can't have it, you can't either" card,
Right.
and he'll just start killing as many people as he can.
Yep.
Well, and I want to ask this. I want to ask the people of the United States. I want to ask my fellow former Republicans or Republican voters. If you stand with Russia, do you stand with a guy who flattens city blocks because he doesn't get what he wants?
J.D. Vance, the answer
right?
is
Is that the person you want to follow? Is that the kind of person you think is a leader of a democratic country? I don't. Right. I think the answer is no.
Well, unfortunately there are many of these people who think that Vladimir Putin is the correct side of this. If Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Andy Biggs and Paul Gosar and Jack Posobiec and Alex Jones and all these other people out there in the vast right-wing media ecosphere, if they had their choice, we would be siding with Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
If they had their choice, we would change sides. If Donald Trump took office again in 2024, or if he had prevailed in 2020, we would see a decimated Ukraine under the boot of Soviet, or see, I'm old, under the boot
Soviet
of
style.
Russian occupation. And it would be one of the most hideous human rights abuses in world history. And we may still see that if we don't. Again, I strongly believe that the only thing that can save Vladimir Putin, he cannot defeat Ukraine militarily. He certainly cannot defeat NATO militarily. But an American fifth column inside Congress and inside the American media can save him from himself.
So, Joe, we've got only a few minutes here, guys. So I want to get some final thoughts. But Joe, talk to us about what Rick just said about the idea that Ukraine has been more than holding its own in this war. It has taken back some territory in this war, but this is the time now where more weapons, more equipment, more gear will make the difference, because now is not the time to pull the foot off the pedal.
Yeah, no, look, basically, Putin is doing nothing now but throwing, basically going to throw bodies and such a massive
Human
number.
wave attack. Yep.
Yeah, human wave attack to breach the line, and to defend that with far fewer people. Like there's 2 million people, I think, in Ukraine that are willing and ready to fight, but they're not deployed or trained, most of them. And I think the thing here clearly is, in the spring, will they have the tanks, the artillery, and I think the air cover? If they do,
I think that's the most important thing we could do right now. If Russia can't control the skies, the the forward line of troops will get pushed back almost instantly. If they don't have the ability to dominate the airspace, then they're going to have to fight us and fight Ukraine from much deeper inside Russia than they are right now. They're able to run logistics right up to the line right now.
And that's where the fifth column is such a danger, Rick, because that's
Yeah.
what they'll be saying. No, don't do that. We can't give them any more. We've already spent too much, and kind of rev up as many Americans as they can to say, no, stop. We're going too far. You're gonna up the ante, and we're gonna get into nuclear war. All the crap that they're gonna sell. This is again where I think the biggest failure has been with the American press corps. It has not put any of this into context. Still covers it as Republicans versus Democrats, and not the real struggle right now that's happening writ large about autocracy versus democracy.
That's
yes,
right.
Ukraine's the front line, but we stop it there, or we will be. Poland, other places will be pulled in, and that's when we'll end up having to send our own again. When right now we can, if we just get them the equipment and the training, and some of that's happening, but again, it's mostly getting as much of it to them as fast. It's about speed. I think.
Joe, I think people have a sense, I think, that the United States has a really big military, right? They don't get just how fucking big. The United States military budget is larger than the next 9 countries combined. Wrap your mind around that. China, Russia, Great Britain, India, Pakistan, whatever the top 9 are, we still have a larger military budget. So the fact that we're, sending them, I don't understand why we're not sending them more tanks.
It's rounding error. It's rounding error what we're sending.
It is. It is exactly that. It is a rounding error.
All right.
But I've never been happier to pay taxes, man.
Let me say this to all of our folks out there: if you go to Google, type in your zip code, find out who your member of Congress is. Mm-hmm. If they have an R behind their name, call them first thing in the morning and say, "You damn well better vote to extend Ukrainian aid." Right? This is a top priority of Marjorie Taylor Greene and all of the other goons like Matt Gaetz and all these other people who hold McCarthy hostage by the short and curlies. McCarthy doesn't want to cut off aid to Ukraine, but you know what? He's too big a chicken shit to stand up to them.
That's
And
right.
so if you are a
They
quote
all voted
unquote
for
moderate
McCarthy, knowing
Republican, you
they,
better be on the side of
and
Ukraine,
they,
because
you
it's
know,
not just a military question.
Right.
It's a question of values, right? And I think sometimes, guys, we get so wrapped up in ads and polling and issues and everything else that these fights, whether they're political or military, come down to values. What is the value that you represent and that you believe you and your community and your country should represent? And I posit that Americans believe in the Ukrainian value of democracy and freedom, self-expression and self-determination, not in might makes right, like Russia is attempting to do to the Ukrainian people.
but let's don't forget, like, if all of these good Republicans voted for McCarthy, knowing they were getting Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Every
knowing,
single one of them.
That's another show, and we will have some fun
Yeah.
with them. But all right, listen, guys, we're over our hour, but I want to get one last thought. So, Rick, lead us off.
Look, folks, I think what we talked about tonight was the battle against authoritarian movements is a global battle. This global battle, as Joe was saying, as Stu and Reed all have talked about, they're fighting it in the fields and in the trenches and the cities of Ukraine right now. We are fighting it politically still. We saw the very tip, the ragged edge of chaos on January 6th of what the other side will do if they don't get their way politically. Unless we do this at the ballot box and in the voting booth, we're going to have to do it in a much harder, bloodier, more terrible way, and that will break America's long string of peaceful transitions. We've already shattered it a little bit, but it's not completely broken. It is important we stand up and fight for democracy every day. And we try to have good conversations here with y'all to make sure that we keep people informed and encouraged and moving in the right direction. So thanks, everybody.
All right, Joe, how about you?
Same. I mean, it's democracy here, democracy in Ukraine. Both are really important, and it's not going to go away this cycle. It's going to be persistent. It's now a global movement of autocrats, and it's really our staying power. They count on us being exhausted. They count on us to basically lose. Our attention span is not the greatest on the planet in our country. We got to keep our attention on the prize, and it's protecting our freedom, our democracy, and helping Ukraine keep theirs with everything we've got.
Stuart.
Yeah, look, I just want to, tomorrow at 6 here, we're going to have two people, Malcolm Nance and Sarah Ashton Carrillo, Americans who have volunteered to fight over there. I think we might have a video from Sarah that's recorded.
Yeah, we'll run it right here at the end. Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, these are people that, like, they walk the talk. They quit very comfortable lives, and they're over there putting their lives at risk.
That's right.
And I just I admire them so much, and it's going to be fascinating to talk to them.
And listen, I want to thank the three of y'all for joining me this evening, and for everybody out there. I was thinking about this before we went on, that Ukraine, I think, is a pretty young country, right? They were led by a dynamic young leader. And as I looked back through 2022 and so many of the conversations that I've had already this year, and seeing how many young Americans are unwilling to sit down and shut up in the face of what we're seeing, I think that the kids are all right, both in Ukraine and here. I want to thank everybody. Again, you can always go to resolutesquare.com for all of our information. We'll run a promo for Sarah's show tomorrow night. As always, gang, thank you so much. Rick, Joe, Stu, thanks for joining me. And everybody else, be safe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, folks.
This is Sarah Ashton Cirillo, and I'm coming to you from the trenches in the Donbass, part of Ukraine, which is at the forefront of the fight for liberation and freedom against the Russian invaders. And I'm giving a shout out to two men who understand what fighting for democracy is about, both in Ukraine and in the United States. I'll be appearing with both Stuart Stevens and Malcolm Nance, two heroes of liberty themselves, as we discuss the one-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian war criminals, and what the future holds for these brave patriots in Ukraine and across the world. Sarah Ashton Cirillo, Looking forward to speaking to you soon alongside Stuart Stevens and Malcolm Nance. Slava Ukraini!